I know that there are still people coming in as we speak, but as it's past 12 o'clock now, I think we better get started because we've got a very tight time schedule today of an hour. So welcome to you all. My name's Jackie Porter. I'm the Cabinet Member for Place and the Local Plan. And there is, today we're discussing setting the standard for net zero carbon homes. And I'm delighted to welcome today Clara Bagenal-George, who's from Elementa Consulting, who we've been working with throughout the whole process of this local plan, and who we really were so inspired by when we talked to her. I think about 18 months ago now, that we have been working with Elementa Consulting throughout in the preparation of this local plan. And we're also joined today by Adrian Fox, who is the lead strategic planner for Winchester City Council. And I think he is on the screen as a head for you now. And we want to get started. So I'm going to hand over to Adrian in a moment. But all I can just also mention is that this is being recorded. So please do be aware that if you are on the screen, what you may be doing at the same time, you may be trying to eat your lunch or whatever. So please do take yourself off the screen if you think that's appropriate, but certainly keep yourself mute. If you wish to ask a question at any time, just put it into the chat and I will try and put the questions together so that we don't repeat and take questions out of order. But also I may ask you to come and join on the screen. So if you can put your name in, that would be really helpful. Thank you very much. Over to Adrian.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Good afternoon. My name's Adrian Fox. I'm the Strategic Planning Manager at Winchester City Council. So next slide, please, Beth. So a brief outline of the event. I'm going to discuss the role of the local plan and how it can assist the council with its carbon neutrality targets. And then I'm going to hand over to Clara to talk about obviously what is LETI, how it can affect the way we build houses, and what does carbon neutral houses look like, and obviously more about the running costs and what exactly LETI is, because she's more versed with these than I am. So you'll be in capable hands. So next slide, please. So to set the context, probably many of you are aware that in June 2019, Winchester City Council declared a climate emergency. The local planning is one of the tools that can help obviously the council move towards becoming a carbon neutral district by 2030, but it is only one of the tools. And all services and activities within the council have an important role to play in moving us towards carbon neutrality. And the costs on the effects of climate change and adaptation are most likely to be felt by the most vulnerable members of society, hence why we feel that it's such a key issue for the local plan. Next slide, please. So at the moment, we're consulting on our Regulation 18 local plan until the 14th of December. Next slide, please. And the key dates are that we've got till the 14th of December for people to submit comments on the Regulation 18 local plan. So please do encourage you to submit comments on that, and I'll come back to how you can do that. So in terms of the journey that we're on, we basically did a lot of evidence base for the local plan, and we asked for people's comments on the strategic issues and priorities document last year. We analysed those feedback and reported those back to LPAG, and we've now produced a draft Regulation 18 plan for consultation. What we need to do is obviously look at those feedback that we've got after the closing date and refine that and publish a Regulation 19 local plan, and then obviously submit that to the Secretary of State, who will appoint an independent examiner, and we'll go off to examination and then hopefully adopt the plan towards the end part of 2024. Next slide, please. So some of you will be familiar with this slide. So this is just how the Regulation 18 plan is structured. We've got a series of topics, and within those topics, we've got key issues and a strategic policy, and then we've got development management policy sitting behind that, and obviously some site allocations. Next slide, please. So it is centered around the climate emergency, and we've got a number of topics centered around that. And obviously the one that we were discussing today is the topic called carbon neutrality and low carbon infrastructure. But the key message is that it's kind of the golden thread, the theme that runs throughout the Regulation 18 local plan, and obviously making sure obviously that's integrated to high quality and well-designed places. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So what are we trying to achieve? As I said, obviously the local plan has a key role in assisting the council moving towards the net zero carbon target of 2030, and mitigating and adapting to climate change and designing for low carbon infrastructure is a defining issue. We want obviously all of these issues to be at the forefront of developers, architects' minds, and asking them to demonstrate through the plan application how they've integrated this into their design. Now, the Planning and Energy Act 2008 gives local planning authorities the ability to set local energy efficiency standards in their local plan, subject to the costs of these being measured through the local plan viability assessment. Next slide, please. So we've appointed Dixon Searle Partnership to undertake a local plan viability assessment. They've been involved throughout the plan making stage. So they started on very early on our journey with us about obviously what are the policy costs in the Regulation 18 local plan. And a copy of their interim report is available as part of the evidence base in terms of being transparent about the costs and the assumptions of the policies that we've got in the Regulation 18 local plan. As Councillor Porter mentioned, we appointed Elementa Consulting to undertake an evidence base on net zero carbon targets and obviously the cost of these and how they basically differ between the existing building regs and future building regs, such as the future homes. And Clara can explain a bit more about those in her presentation. So both of these documents are available on the Council's new website, and I'd encourage you to have a look at those. Thank you. Next slide, please. So there's a number of other policies in this topic that address climate change and adaptation. And basically the whole idea is that it's a much stronger emphasis in than the current adopted local plan. And the key message that we get across, and we had a good event last week on raising the bar of design, is that all of these matters must be addressed through the design process and documented. Next slide, please. And this illustration just hopefully captures what we want. It's a circular integral process that obviously leads down obviously the route of putting different hats on through the design process of demonstrating that you've thought about, for example, orientation, layout and design. And obviously, most importantly, obviously the energy hierarchy when you're obviously considering obviously how you can actually design a site. And we want that information documented as part of the planning application process. Next slide, please. Here's an illustration that really shows that obviously the design process is at the heart of this, and obviously you need to think about mitigation and adaptation, and obviously think about obviously how the world is changing in terms of obviously this summer we had obviously very high temperatures, and obviously make sure your design thinks about that in terms of obviously its implications for its layout and design. And again, this all comes back to the design process, which is at the heart of this process. Next slide, please. As part of the design process, obviously we need to think about the orientation, but obviously we need to think about obviously how much solar gain we get in the house and natural daylight. Now, natural daylight is obviously good for people's health and well-being, but obviously we don't need to think about overheating and obviously how that influences the design and layout. And obviously how people obviously interact in their houses obviously is really important, because obviously the rising costs of energy bills, and obviously that is the #1 priority at the moment in terms of costs of living. So it's a really fundamental and important issue. Next slide, please. So what are we doing to raise the bar on energy standards? Well, we've looked at obviously the existing building regs, which are Part L, and we've looked at the future home standards. And basically we've identified in policy CN3 that basically residential development should have a total energy use of less than 35 kilowatts per metre square a year. And Clara will explain a bit more about how that's calculated in her presentation. And the key thing is that non-residential development still needs to meet the BREEAM Excellent standard. Now, we think this is a much simpler way of basically expressing in energy uses rather than perhaps in the building regulations where you talk about perhaps 75% less than the current regulations. So we think this is an easy, clear, understandable and transparent way of understanding the actual energy use in the building. For those of you who read your meters, you'll be used to obviously being charged per kilowatt per meter square. Next slide, please. Like I say, there's other policies in the local plan that talk about how we can obviously raise the importance and the bar on energy standards. So there's policy CN2, which talks about the energy hierarchy. So really thinking about energy consumption and use, part of the design process. We've got a policy CN4, which talks about water efficiency standards in line with Southern Water's T100 target. We've got an updated policy on renewable and low carbon energy schemes to take on board some latest thinking about things like battery storage and the need for evacuation plans and aftercare. And we've got a policy on micro energy generation schemes, recognising that obviously they are important, and likewise on energy storage, which is becoming very important as part of obviously our renewable journey. In the heritage topic, we've got policy HE14 that talks about alterations and improvements to designated and non-designated historic assets. And that's really important to kind of think more laterally about what you can do in those buildings to obviously help with the climate emergency. Next slide, please. So how to get involved, like I say, it's a very brief overview of obviously what the Regulation 18 local plan covers. So basically we are encouraging people to respond via Citizen Space to those draft policies, and there's a QR code on your screen there that will take you directly to Citizen Space. And we're specifically asking people whether or not they support, object, and if they object, please tell us how the policy could be amended, improved, and the clearer you can be, the better really. There is a short video on the Citizen Space website that shows you how to enter comments on Citizen Space, and we'd really encourage people to do that because that makes sure that we log comments against the policy that you're talking about, and we don't have to kind of interpret, are you talking about this policy or that policy? Next slide, please. We've also updated the local plan website. It's got its own dedicated website that breaks down the topics by areas, so you can click on a particular topic and only read that. And hopefully it's got a series of helpful drop-down menus rather than relying on people scrolling down the website. And there's the evidence base on that local plan website that we'd encourage you to have a look at before responding to the consultation. And finally, kind of make sure that you respond to the consultation by 23:59 hours on the 14th of December. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to hand over to Clara, who's going to talk us through the work that they've done with us to support our local plan journey. Thank you, Clara.
Clara, just before you start, I'm just going to interrupt to say a lot of people have joined since while Adrian's been talking and I've been talking, and we're now up to, I don't know, over 80, I think. I just wanted to say welcome to anybody that's come in. We have been recording this, so you can go back and look at what we've said before. But if you have a question at any time during Clara's presentation, if you can put it on chat, then she and I will go through them at the end and try and group them together so that we can answer in those conversations, and then if we have time we'll have conversation. But if you can put your question on chat, that'd be really helpful. Thank you. Clara, welcome. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and it's really great to be here today. So I'm going to give an overview of an introduction to our building regulations, give a bit more detail than Adrian's given on the policy CN3, and then just describe how it's different to regulation, why it's different and what that actually means, and what are the outcomes. So if you go on to the next slide, probably skip that one. I'm just going to talk a bit about, so Winchester has this carbon neutrality plan with the aim of the district to be carbon neutral by 2030. This is a fantastic plan, and it's really great that Winchester has this. And so what we've been doing is saying, okay, so how can the local plan be developed so it's aligned with this carbon neutrality plan? And so we really believe that if this draft policy CN3 is followed, then homes will be in line with this carbon neutrality plan, which is great news. So on the next slide, I'm going to giving you a little bit of an overview of the regulations. So some of you may be aware from 2008-2015 there was something called the Code for Sustainable Homes, which was aiming to provide regulation and policy providers a route to better performing homes. Now, for various reasons I won't go into, it was axed, and we didn't have that anymore. So we do currently have a Part L building regulations for 2021, and they've been recently updated. And we will get a future home standard looking at homes and a future building standard looking at buildings other than homes that will be in place by 2025. And there is the ambition that the future home standard will deliver 70 to 80% less than the regulations from 2013, that means the current regulations, because that was before the latest regulations came out, and that domestic buildings. So and the 2021 regs already have 30% less carbon emissions than 2013. So we are doing well, right? Our regulations are reducing the carbon emissions, which is good. But the question is this enough? Are the regulations going to go far enough to mean that Winchester can meet the aims of its carbon neutrality plan? Well, we'll discuss that as part of this presentation, really. Now I'm going to go on to the next slide and we'll talk about policy CN3. So Adrian did a great job at introducing it. I'm going to just talk through it in a little bit more detail about what it actually means. So at planning stage, as part of the planning application, homes will be required to show that they have less space heating demand than 15 kilowatt hours a square metre based on a predictive energy model. They'll also be asked to show that they meet less than 35 kilowatt hours a square metre of electricity. There'll be no fossil fuels allowed for your heating or for cooking. And the homes will need to have on-site renewables, which means that 100% of the energy that's used throughout the year is generated on the roof. And in addition to that, it will be required that applicants will share in that planning application if they'll be metering and monitoring and reporting. So that's a kind of a rough summary overview of CN3. And for non-residential, the non-residential developments are required to meet BREEAM Excellence, and they have similar requirement to disclose what their metering, monitoring and reporting strategies are. So, I've been working with Winchester on looking at how to develop this local plan. So I'm here with my Element hat on, but I also have a LETI hat. So who are LETI? What's this? So LETI are a group of built environment professionals that have been working in this space for the last 5 or 6 years, that have been trying to really understand how we need to be designing and building and occupying buildings to meet our climate change targets. So it's an independent group of experts that have been come together in this space and produced guidance on what we need to do. In 2020, LETI produced the Climate Emergency Design Guide that has these space heating targets and energy use targets within them. So the draft local plan does follow the LETI approach. And I just wanted to share with you that LETI did a bit of work. So within a year of producing this guidance, then LETI were aware of over 3,000 homes at master plan level that were aiming to achieve that guidance, aiming to achieve the standards, sorry, and over 2,500 homes at stage 3, so post planning. So that, and it has since then become the standard that is used across the UK for when developers and contractors want to meet the climate emergency. So we see it referenced a lot in briefs. So there's me with my consultant hat on about developers that are progressive, that want to meet the climate emergency, say that their projects are going to meet these LETI standards. So we didn't just say, okay, this is what Winchester is going to do. Winchester commissioned Elementa, and so on the next slide, and Curry and Brown and Etude to do a evidence base to really try to understand, okay, where are we at in current regulations, which was 2013, where are we going to be in 2021 regs, what's it going to look like with the Future Home Standard, and comparing that to the LETI standard. And that evidence base is available on the website. You can see there the in-depth analysis that we've done. Now, what's the main difference with regulation? And so this was touched on earlier, and so you can see, oh gosh, I don't know what's happened. So the main thing is that we have regulations has a percentage carbon emission reduction from a notional building. So effectively, what the regulation is you build in an energy model in the computer the actual home. It creates a kind of shadow home that has certain efficiencies, and you need to be aligned with that. So you need to be no worse than that for regulation. And there are policies, for instance, in London, where you need to be 35% better than that. So the language that's often used is percentage better. You need to be 30%, 30%, have 30% lower carbon emissions. Now, it is kind of slightly confusing because it's to do with carbon, not energy, and carbon changes as the grid changes, and also it's to do with an energy model and comparing it to something else. And so it is really unclear to understand. And buildings that are kind of 10% better or 20% better or 50% better, it's hard to understand actually what that means. So the LETI approach is that we're moving towards this much simpler metric that is based on your energy divided by your floor area. Everyone knows what that is because your energy bills are based on it, your meters are based on it, and you kind of can really intrinsically easily understand, how is my building performing and what are the energy bills going to be. We really care about running costs, and therefore we think it's much more appropriate to put a policy together that is based on energy, because that is based on that affects running costs. On the next slide, you'll see why, from a kind of science-based climate point of view, it's really important to set energy targets. So if we go on to that slide. I think if we go backwards on one, there should be, yeah, that's right, thank you. So when we're trying to think about building a home that meets our climate change targets, you could say that you could spend all the energy you want, and as long as you've got renewables on your roof or you're buying additional renewables, it's net zero. And that is true, but we need all buildings in the UK and all homes to meet net zero. And in order for them to do that, we need an equitable distribution of renewable energy. And so that's why these energy budgets and energy targets are really important, because LETI did some work to show that actually if homes do meet that target of 35 kilowatt hours a square metre, then that means we've got enough renewable energy in the UK to meet our climate targets. And because homes have, especially in the type of homes in Winchester, they're relatively low rise, they're able to generate their own enough energy that they use. That works really well. Other buildings that are more high rise or commercial buildings that are more energy intensive, they can't do that. So we need to let them have that share of the renewables that are off buildings. I think even you've got your hand up, but I think we're going to address questions at the end. So it's probably better if you put your question in the chat, and then we can find an appropriate time to bring that up. So what does this all mean in practical terms? What does it look like? So basically, it means you need to meet really, really good levels of fabric efficiency. That means your walls are going to be at 500 to 600 millimetres. We're not requiring passive house certification. It's nothing about that. It's just saying that's the kind of level of energy efficiency we need. And there's been lots of passive house developments that have been certified, and lots of developments that meet passive house fabric that have been built over the last 10 years. So this isn't something wildly new. We're not pushing beyond what people have done before. It's quite standard in our industry. You also need to add a heat pump. A heat pump is a way of generating heating and hot water and without using fossil fuels. You've all got one in your house. It's your fridge. So what it does is it moves heat around. So in your fridge, it moves heat out of it extracts heat out of your fridge, so your fridge stays cool. For your home, it's going to do something different. It's going to extract heat out of the air and warm your house. And step 3 is, as we said before, you need to have renewables on your roof that meet the energy consumption that you use over the course of the year. There's a few more details on fabric performance on the next slide. We probably won't go through them in too much detail, so probably skip over that a little bit, but you can see the LETI guidance that shows the kind of U values that are aligned. So if you use these kind of U values and also the proportional window area, then you're likely to achieve that target that you need to achieve. So what does it mean if you're a developer? You'll need to do a bit of more work than usual on your thermal bridge detailing. So this is where you've got your roof, where your meets your wall, where your floors meet your wall. These are all points that with kind of buildings that are just meeting our building regulations not much thought is put into it, but for super low energy homes, you do need to put a bit more consideration into that to make sure there's no cold bridges. Airtightness, so having a home that is airtight and is ventilated through with mechanical ventilation with heat recovery really reduces those heat losses, and that's really important if you want to get a home that's really energy efficient. But that does require some extra detailing around junctions, around penetrations, to make sure that the home is airtight. The planning policy means that you need to do this performance like predictive modelling at planning stage to prove that you're going to meet the targets. It involves designing the building so that you're optimising solar gains in winter. So you want to capture that low incoming sun that don't know if it's coming in your house at the moment, but it could be coming in mine if I was oriented slightly differently right now. So you really want to catch that low angle sun, but you want to block the high angle sun, the high sun in summer, to make sure it doesn't overheat, but you want to let in that low angle sun. So there's a bit of design optimization that can be done. We need lots of insulation, as we've said, and optimizing those glazing ratios. So you want to get good daylight in, but not have glazing that's too big, because that's 10 times more heat goes out of your windows than it does your walls per square meter. So we can't have too big windows. All right, so that's kind of what it means for developers. But what does this mean for Winchester yourselves as a planning authority? So there's a change to the planning application. We've kind of talked about this before. Planning applications are going to be required to do predictive modelling, like TM54 type modelling or PHP modelling. It's kind of much more commonly done now than 10 years ago in industry. Lots of consultants are quite confident in doing that. It also means, widely in Winchester, it's likely that there'll be a bit of upskilling for tradesmen and developers to be able to develop this, but that's a really good thing. And also in-house in the council and understanding around net zero, so they can monitor these planning applications fully. So on the next slide, you can see what this means for design. And I suppose I really want to kind of share with you, and hopefully this can be your key takeaway, that this is an approach to meeting having energy efficient low running bills homes. It doesn't mean anything towards the actual type of design. So you can have really kind of modern looking homes that meet the standard. You can have really traditional looking homes that meet the standard. You can have low rise homes, you can have medium rise homes. And here's just an example of homes that have been built that are meeting that fabric efficiency standard that's required. So the next section is talking about what are the outcomes. So what are we hoping that will be achieved by this policy? And the first thing is looking at energy consumption, which I've been driving on about quite a lot of the day. So we wanted to show you the comparison between a home that's that meets our 2020 run regulations. So any home that's built from today onwards, so last year, needs to meet these regulations. Homes from 2025 will need to meet the Future Home Standard, and homes that meet our policy CN3 have much less energy. So you can see that there's also some error bars there because of the way that the policy has been prepared. Using that predictive modelling, we're much more assured of the actual performance. With the Future Home Standard, it's done through compliance modelling, which will have less assurance. And also because the framework is that percentage carbon emissions, you can have a building that meets the policy that is efficient, but you could equally have a building that meets the policy but isn't efficient because of that complicated way that regulations looks at that. On the next slide, you'll see about running costs. So compared to current regulations, this policy will mean that homes will have 40 to 50% less running costs. And that's the key driver here. As well as meeting our climate targets, we want to make sure that we're making sure that people aren't in fuel poverty and aren't paying, having to pay too much money on their bills. You'll see Future Home Standard does get you some of the way there, but not all of the way. What about capital costs, right? So this will cost more for developers. It was estimated, we've done a lot of analysis and it's in that evidence base. It's estimated to cost 5% more than meeting the Future Home Standard. But it's really important to note that the team here at Winchester have done a lot of work on feeding that into the viability, and so this is being included in the viability assessment, and it's shown to be viable. This will reduce with economies of scale. So yes, at the beginning, when the first lots of homes are built based on this policy, it may be that cost, but very, very quickly it won't. That cost will reduce because the supply chains will be there, and developers and contractors will be used to building to this. So we think that will dramatically reduce within a short time frame from when the policy is implemented. And as I've highlighted in the previous slide, that it really reduces running costs. So we think it is worth spending that extra money on those upfront costs. And lastly, if you don't do it now, sorry, you're on the right. Here we go. Yeah. If you don't do it now, you're going to have to do it later to meet the climate targets. It's 5 times more expensive to retrofit than to do it when building new. So it's really important, I think, that we do it. It's 5% more, but it'd be 25% more if you were to do it later. So it's really, really important that we build to this good level of performance now. So just to summarize at the end on the last slide, if from where we started at the beginning is also another benefit to this policy is that it's in line with the carbon neutrality plan. It's in line with meeting our climate targets, which is really important too. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sure as I can see, there's lots of questions. I'm looking forward to having a chat.
Thank you very much, Clara. And I think people will start to add in more questions as time goes on. So, but I'm just conscious of the time and that we've got about half an hour. So hopefully you can all hear me and you can all hear Clara. And I'm just going to go back to, well, actually, I'm going to start with the last question, which is the 5% is additional to the cost of meeting future homes. What's the percentage increase on regs as they stand today? So if you compare now those.
So we did some analysis, and that's in the evidence base, is that it is, so compared to now, depending on the type of home, it's between 8 and 11% higher capital cost than building a home that meets the current 2021 regulations.
However, I do notice that in the chat, somebody's put, if these homes were available, I'd buy one now. So I think that house builders are beginning to see that actually this is what people are going to be demanding of their homes. Yeah. They will want to buy that home in preference to another. So I think that's really an interesting conversation. But 9% on now, but what about against future home standard? Do you imagine there's going to be a difference in that difference as well?
Yeah, so that's 4 to 5% more than the future.
Right, okay, so that's the difference between the two. Thank you. The question going back to the first one was Mark Butt asked, I thought the current local plan for non-residential was BREEAM outstanding, and I went back and did check. It is BREEAM excellent. I don't know if you or Adrian would like to comment on that, because at the moment we haven't really got any LETI standards for commercial buildings that we felt were appropriate at this point in time at the Reg 18 stage. I don't know if Adrian wants to comment on this.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Yes, I can comment on that. So you are correct that policy CP11 talks about BREEAM excellent, and obviously that's an important distinction. I think obviously we've taken a view on what is achievable and from past planning permissions that have been granted and what actually is achievable, because we want to make sure that obviously things are deliverable. So hence why we've plugged it where we have. It's because obviously it's based on our experience and our knowledge of schemes that have come forward in Winchester District. And also combined with that is obviously our need for those types of buildings within our latest study is there's not a massive need of employment sites in the district. That need is coming towards the end part of the plan period. Now there's nothing to stop any developer coming forward with obviously higher standards. We would actively encourage that, but we're trying to be realistic about, based on our past experience, what actually is achievable. So hopefully that answers your question, but Clara may want to add something.
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, because of the passive house standard, industry has really moved forward on low energy homes, a lot more than low energy non-residential. So, you know, in the last 15 years, we've seen a massive improvement on the energy efficiency of homes. And so the industry is more ready for low energy homes than low energy non-residential. And so that's why it's slightly easier to achieve the LETI targets for homes than it is for non-residential. And so I think that there was a focus on, and because, you know, energy costs are so important and there's more new homes being built in winter, so that's why we focus the kind of consultant time on the evidence base on homes, and we think that has the biggest impact.
I think that doesn't preclude us from not doing something about it later on. I think the trouble is that a home is, we know what sort of lifestyle people live in a home, but we don't know what a building that's commercial is occupied by, really. Thank you. The next one's from Maddo. How do we deal with cooling houses in summer? You talked about that to some extent, but if you'd just like to go on with that a little, that would be helpful.
So there was a new regulation that's actually come out as part of the 2021 update of building regulations, and it's called Part O, and it's all about overheating. So as part of, what you require as part of building regs is to meet that Part O regulation. And Part O is very similar to what the policy has been in London for the last 5 years, which is basically there's an organisation called CIBSE that has put together a modelling methodology for kind of what designers need to use to test whether the likelihood of homes overheating or not. It's called TM59. Technical Memorandum 59. It's a really good bit of methodology actually, and it kind of you put in your current and your future weather files, and you put some case study buildings that are typical of the development in the model, and it really tells you hour by hour what's happening, what the temperature in the spaces are likely to be, and you need to meet certain criteria. So it can't exceed a certain amount of temperature and for a certain amount of hours, exceedance. And buildings will need to meet that now to meet the 2021 regulations.
So we'll need that anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The next one, as I said, we've got the support. Thank you very much for that offer of Sveta of actually I think several people have said that. The next one is about preparing neighbourhood plans and how you fit in, making sure that your neighbourhood plan has these high policies, when he's saying that it's Marcio saying that examiners are not allowing these policies, it's only local plans that can set those standards. So Adrian might like to answer this one, because he's saying that really it forces people to water down their standards. So we've got some different communities doing neighbourhood plans. How can we be sure that they will end up with the same quality of insulation that we will be demanding in our local plan?
Thank you, Councillor Porter. If I may, can I just quickly go back on the other question about overheating, because it is important to note that we've got policy D9 in the Regulation 18 plan, which talks about overheating, and it's really thinking about the as part of the design process about the natural environment and how that can also be used to kind of look at obviously overheating and shading and cover vegetation. You could use external shutters, the colour of materials on the external of the property. And I think with obviously the heat wave that we experienced this summer, it's becoming more and more important to think of that as part of the design process. So I think obviously we want obviously the passive solar gain that Clara was talking about, but also obviously we need to balance that with obviously the overheating. So I think it's really important to look at policy D9, because it's really important to think about the natural environment, because also we don't want the natural environment overheating in the immediate vicinity of the house. So sorry if I could just add to that. But just turning to neighbourhood plans, they need to be obviously in conformity with the strategic policies in the adopted local plan. So I think obviously once obviously our local plan gets through the examination process and adopted, if we're obviously successful in, I really hope we are, in terms of obviously the LETI energy standards, I think it'll be a lot easier then for the neighbourhood plan to say that to be in conformity with the local plan, obviously the local plan's done the lead work, etc. So I think obviously in the absence of that, I can understand it's an uphill struggle for neighbourhood plans to kind of go for something different. But I think obviously having this policy will help neighbourhood plans. But I don't know whether or not Clara wants to add any other experience. Thank you.
Nothing more to add from me.
Okay. The next one's from Nigel. How will the cost of achieving net zero be achieved against other planning requirements? And I don't know if Adrian wants to answer this or Clara wants to start.
Probably best Adrian. He's done some great work
so.
on viability. So
yeah, we talk about cakes a lot, don't we, Adrian?
Yeah, we do talk about cakes and pies, but the easiest way to describe it is a cake or a pie. Basically, there are known costs that you have to take out of that cake or pie. So, for example, developer profit, things like the current building regulations, things like affordable homes. And the cake, unfortunately, is not getting any bigger than what it was basically when it was originally baked. So we've done that local plan viability work with Dixon Cell Partnership, which is available on the internet, which has looked at the policy costs. And then with the help of Clara's team and Curry Brown's team, we did independent kind of work. And Curry Brown spoke to Dixon Cell Partnership about the costs. So it's an iterative process to obviously understand and make sure, obviously, what we're actually got in the local plan in terms of policy costs are accounted for at this early stage, and that's really important. And I think we're quite unusual, according to Dixon Cell, that we've appointed them right at the beginning part of the plan making process to make sure things stack up, and obviously to make sure the slices of pies can be achievable. But Clara, I don't know whether you want to add anything else to that.
Well, actually, I'm going to go on because Liam has written a little bit in the chat, which I expect that Clara can see, because he's talking about home buyers, but I think it's also about home makers, builders, adoption, because of the supply side issues being a major barrier to adoption. And I think that's a really interesting point, because we have been talking about it with adoption of other net zero carbon and low carbon technologies such as car batteries. So I wonder if Clara might like to comment on really the availability of supplies to achieve these this aim.
Yeah, so it's, I mean, the approach is quite I'd say lower tech, and it's something that we've been, the industry's been doing for a while now. So we need more insulation, but we've always been insulating our homes. Yes, we do need some ventilation, some MVHR units and some heat pumps, but this has been something that, the industry has been doing for some time now and will be doing a lot more of, and there are kind of a lot of schemes being developed. There's not thousands of schemes that have were developed to achieve this 10 years ago, but there are thousands of schemes in development and in construction, and so by the time this local plan is coming into force, the industry will be much more ready for it.
Okay, and you see that actually even in day to day. As a homeowner, you can see those things are becoming more and more affordable, can't you?
Yeah.
As time goes on. It's about the supply side of it, though, and that was interesting because we were talking to a house builder last week who is, looking at that as one of their conversations now. So, as having seen this come online, so that's interesting.
What's really great though is, we're in 2022, and so there is time for upskilling. There is time for engaging supply chains early and saying, this is coming into force and we do want to build homes here at this time, and therefore this is going to be need to be available. So that's what's really great about this.
Now, the next question is from Mark, and I have to admit, I can't work out what BNG is, but it's going to be obvious when you tell me. Has any consideration been given to the impact of the number of homes deliverable on sites with the LETI standard alongside BNG? Sorry, can't work that one out, and other policies.
Yeah, so I presume, but there you go. Here, there you go, Gatswold. Yeah, it just came biodiversity. Yeah. So again, we've looked at obviously the cost of biodiversity net gain as part of the local plan viability assessment, which is all comes back to the cake in terms of obviously that is an additional cost that obviously we factored into this equation. And like I say, that work's available in the Dixon Cell interim report. So we have looked at that, and obviously there is a great opportunity about the synergy between obviously biodiversity net gain. We're talking about overheating, and it's obviously not only on people's health but obviously nature as well. So obviously it's thinking about how we design these buildings in the future to think about obviously rising temperatures, changing temperatures and things like that. That comes back to policy CN1, which talks about climate change and adaptation, thinking how buildings and how our lives will change with obviously rising temperatures.
Thank you. Fariha says, sorry if I missed this, I'm sure you haven't though, but how does this align with improving existing developments and retrofit? And I have to say, this is something that we really struggle with as a council, working out how to do this so that we can make sure that any extension is built to higher standards, and also seeking retrofit. We have over 5,000 homes, council homes, and finding a way to retrofit a home without moving everybody out is not an easy job. So do you want to talk about that, Clara?
I can touch on it. I think, I suppose the point of this policy is that these homes don't add to the retrofit burden, right? So then this policy doesn't address existing homes, and that's not the intention of it. But at least what it addresses is it means that those homes won't have to be retrofitted, and that's like the first part. That's always your first step. It's like let's make sure the problem isn't getting bigger, and once we've done that, we'll try and address the problem. And so I think it's a sensible approach to have been taken by Winchester. But there will need to be a plan of how to incentivise retrofit.
Yeah. Adrian, do you want to comment on that?
I think if I could just add, obviously that comes back to the economies of scale, because obviously where obviously this becomes more the norm, hopefully the economies of scale will benefit obviously existing property owners, because obviously the cost will come down. So I think it's the right way to do it in terms of, as Clara suggests, obviously target the ones that we're building to make sure obviously they are. And I know you've had council board constructive conversations with the existing developers that have got planning permission site to obviously raise the bar of this and come with us on this journey. So I think that's an important part of this obviously jigsaw puzzle. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to say as well that this is something where actually it's a conversation. The Reg 18 is a conversation. And so if you've got any suggestions as individuals on this call that you think should be put into these policies, this is exactly how to do it, which is to go to the policy and put in where you think that what we think you should put in as well, in addition. It's a conversation we've been having at Winchester City Council as well, to try and make sure, and it came up in scrutiny, we are really struggling to find a way to put that, because obviously some development is permitted and some additional development has to have planning permission, and it's going to be a very difficult job to make a way of doing that in the local plan, but it's something we really want to do. So any word suggestions would be gratefully received. The next question I suppose is relating back to the BREEAM outstanding, and I'm going to try and bring that back in at the end because that's another conversation itself. And then a question about examining home buyers. We have had a sort of a conversation with some house builders, particularly small and medium sized developers, about how they get the knowledge to do this confidently. And Clara, you just touched on that, didn't you, just briefly as we were going through. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how the industry can be educated so that they are confident in what they're doing on this?
So we've actually been working with some councils, so West Oxfordshire District Council and Cotswolds and Forest and Dean. They've produced a really useful net zero toolkit, and that is for developers. I think the large scale developers and contractors, they should know what they're doing by now, and they do know what they're doing. The smaller contractors and developers will need some support, but there is support out there. And so we've developed this toolkit which really provides advice on that, and that's actually been done through a Creative Commons license, which means that if Winchester wanted to, they could take the bits that they think are relevant from that guidance and kind of adapt it for your own guidance and do an event around that, because we're kind of keen that any work that's done for local authorities, because it's taxpayers' money, should be shared with everybody. Not all consultants have that view, but I certainly do. So that there is more and more resources out there, and perhaps that's something that could be done as in preparation for this policy coming on board, is that there's discussions with contractors and developers about that upskilling.
And I'm hoping that we can have those sort of conversations with House Builders Federation as well, so that we can face this head on, as opposed to waiting for it just to hit people. That'd be really good.
Right.
A question that Craig makes is that point 4 of CN3 requires 100% of your energy consumption to be via on-site renewables. And that's a really key part of the policy. Is the council therefore asking for off-grid homes rather than net zero homes?
Yeah, so I'm sorry that I didn't make it clear. I realise now that I was unclear in my presentation. So how it works is that you have, over the course of a year, you're generating the same amount of energy that you're using on your building as on your home as you're using, but actually in real time it's a bit different, and that's because so effectively you are connected to a grid, and the grid is definitely needed. But what happens is, on a really sunny day, you're probably not going to use that much electricity. Maybe you're out at work, your kids are at school, but your PV is generating electricity. And what happens at that point is your electricity goes from your PV into the grid and is used by others. And there might also be times, when it's dark, and or when it's when you need lighting or when you need heating, you're not generating any electricity, and you use electricity from the grid. And so this is really good, because it means that over the course of a year you're kind of generating the renewables that you need, but it means you're using the grid as a battery, and that makes it a much more low cost way of achieving net zero. Because if you were to be off grid, you need a big battery store to be able to store all of that energy, because you will be generating a lot more energy in the summer months than the winter months. And what we're saying is, let the grid deal with that, and that's the approach that we're taking. Although that's why it's net zero over the course of a year, not absolute zero.
I do have a community in our area of new houses where they do have battery storage, and it actually is sold back as a bulk back. But
exactly. So and that's the next step, and that's why I think, some people, this standard is progressive, but it's really tailored to what is appropriate for policy, which is minimum. It may be that buildings want to go beyond that and have batteries and have more solar, and I think I want to kind of bring in, I guess, talking about this other question about will that reduce the amount of homes that can be built on a certain plot? And that's really not the case. So what we've done is, when we've done the modelling, we've looked at the level of insulation, the thickness of insulation that you need for typical homes that have a typical density. Now, if you have homes that are orientated perfectly for that kind of taking the sun when you want it, blocking it out when you don't want it, all those things, then it is cheaper to achieve the standards, right? So the policy is set that it doesn't preclude the right amount of homes that need to be built on sites, but for some reason, for sites that have more space, that are more well orientated and happen to have the right orientation, it will be lower cost to achieve the same standards.
Okay, thank you. And in fact, I think that has tied up one of the couple of questions that have come up about that. So the next one was really about the trade-off between reducing affordable homes and increasing net zero homes for the population of Winchester overall. This is certainly a conversation that we've had, even in Cabinet last week, actually. So it would be concerning if it was a significant reduction. Yes, it would, but my personal view is we shouldn't be making any difference between the two. Clara, do you want to just talk through that?
I think it's probably Adrian's probably the better person to bring that on, if that's okay, Adrian.
Yeah, thanks, Cara. Thanks, Councillor Porter. Yeah, obviously we had a big debate about the affordable housing target. We're being very clear that we want obviously 40%, and you'll see that obviously in the policy in the Homes for All chapter, obviously it is geared to recognise that obviously there are costs associated with, for example, phosphates and nitrates, but we're hoping obviously the sewage undertakers will obviously address this and take away that cost. So obviously that comes back to the analogy of the cake or the pie. So obviously that is important, but I think obviously it's that balance, because if you can provide a house that basically has got low energy costs, you can actually afford a mortgage, because basically your outgoings will be a lot less than obviously a energy intensive obviously house. I think that's a real key consideration, because obviously not only is obviously the cost of living, but your mortgage is your biggest payment out each month. So obviously if you've got lower energy costs, you can actually afford to pay off more of your mortgage. So I think it's that balance, and that balance is becoming very, very acute at the moment with obviously rising bills. So like I say, we are very clear in the local plan about the affordable housing targets. We certainly don't want to interfere with that, but if we're serious about this climate emergency, which I know we are at the City Council, we've got to go for this, because basically this is the one way that we can achieve this with the amount of homes that we're planning to build. So we are, as officers and members, also committed to this journey. Thank you.
And actually that comes up in a question, which is how are the lenders approaching the financing of energy efficiency home improvements? What's the plan to finance those? And I suppose it's also relevant because builders, particularly the smaller ones, are also looking at financing against these properties. And I wondered if either of you have heard anything on the whole market, and possibly through Elementa we might have done, the whole market about whether we're finding it difficult to get these buildings actually financed at an early stage.
So there are funding opportunities and finance opportunities that are tied to energy efficiency, and more are coming online, and we'll be ready for the time that this policy is in place. I think it's really important actually to mention, and I didn't mention it before because I want to confuse things, but there is kind of a bit more that. We've only got a few minutes left actually, so I won't go into it in detail, but there's more work on alignment happening about how we're defining good, happening at national level to support lenders to understand the boundary between what's good and what's not good, which means that they can set their more preferable financing strategies aligned with this type of policy. So I think that will be coming through.
Yes, actually, I apologise. It's a different consultant who happens to be a personal friend, so she's obviously not the one that we use Winchester City Council, but she has also said that she wants to make sure that we do have this this awareness of what this means amongst lenders, which is an interesting aspect of it. So, okay, I think that's all the specific questions we've got here now. Is there anybody else that wants to put something forward before we finish this afternoon?
There were two questions one on MMC and one on viability that I've seen.
Yes. Do you want to take those two?
No, I think the MMC piece, I mean, Jake just said that MMC can answer a lot of these solutions. I don't think it's a question, it's more a statement, which is great to hear from Jake. And the viability assessment question, I don't know if Adrian's better to I think there's a question about smaller number of units and assessments within viability, and I think that was done, but you'll know more about the question was have smaller schemes up to 10 units been assessed within the viability.
Yeah, thanks, Clara. So we've done a interim stage 1 report for the local plan viability assessment. The consultants need to do more detailed viability work as we move through the plan process, because in terms of obviously where we've got to, because obviously we appointed them very early on. But if you've got any detailed comments about obviously local plan viability assessments, the assumptions that we've made, can I please encourage you to respond to the local plan consultation? You can comment on the evidence base, and obviously we can feed those comments back to Dixon Cell as part of our ongoing discussions with them about what's been assessed and what hasn't been assessed. So please, it's a really important point you've made there, Paul. So I haven't got all the details to hand, but please can you comment on the evidence base? There's a slot on citizen space where you can put any comments on the local plan viability assessment. We can then feed that back to our consultants and they can have a look at it. But they've done obviously a lot of work already, and I think we're quite unusual as a local authority to have appointed them at the stage we are, which is really important that they bounced off obviously Curry Brown, who's did work for Elementa. So but please do make those comments there and we can have a look at them. Thank you.
Yeah, and there's also about identifying additional areas for solar and wind to achieve in part some of the aims of this policy, and certainly that's a conversation that we have been having about additional sites across the whole district to achieve this. And we have on our website as well a submit a site, and if you have a site that you think is suitable for that, then that's the point at which you can submit the site. I think the conversation, as I said before, this is a conversation about the whole principle of the LETI scheme, and we liked it because it defines something as a specific figure, as a specific outcome, and rather than just a percentage on what was before. So going back to the smaller builders and the conversation that's on the chat about the difficulty for that group of builders, which, you know, to be absolutely realistic, is some of our major delivery is through that method. And we want to make sure that actually you have the full knowledge of how to do this. So if you think that we should be doing something to help you to achieve this, then that's the conversation we need to know about. But also, as was stated pretty early in all of this, this is what buyers are going to start demanding. So if you want a house that's going to sell quickly, you're going to need to do this now anyway. And by the time we get to probably 2026, 2028, 2030, certainly, this will be the norm, we believe. So I think it's something we've got to tackle head on at this point in time. Clara, do you have anything else that you wanted to tie up with those last few comments that have come up?
I have just been really enjoying your exit speech, so I haven't been looking at it.
No, I can't say anything else, but there's some other comments here which our officers will pick up. And if they think it's relevant that we should be responding to the individual, I think we'll try and do that. But this whole event is recorded, so it will be online. So if anybody wants to watch it again and ask questions again or think about anything, please do let us know. I'm looking at Clara here because I think she might be able to answer the questions, but I know that Adrian and the team will be able to answer questions as well. So if you have any other further questions, please do come back to us about them. But also, please put it into the citizen space system. It works really well, and the policy is right there ahead, so you can just scroll down, and underneath you just put in what you'd like it to say, or what you think you've got any queries with as well. That would be really helpful. So thank you very much for coming today. Thank you to Clara, and definitely well done. Thank you very much. Adrian, do you want to say anything to finish off?
No, thank you, Councillor Porter. The only quick thing I wanted to just reiterate is that the future home standards doesn't include renewable energy, does it, Clara? PV. So that, I think, is a real oversight and the advantage of LETI. So obviously, that, to me, in my mind, you've got something that you're producing, you need energy for, got an energy consumer, a house, and obviously we want to minimize that, but obviously generating it on site rather than obviously relying on large solar farms has got to be a good thing. But I do think that was a light bulb moment for us when we were having that discussion with Elementa about that the future home standard does not at the current stage include PVs, which is a massive oversight. So obviously the LETI standards does obviously require that. And I think if we want to be obviously moving towards obviously our climate neutrality targets, we've got to generate it where actually you need it, and that to me is a fundamental requirement.
Yes, and actually on that note, sadly I've been recording the number of hours of sunshine on our solar panels for about 8 or 9 years now.
Yep.
It's so consistent, it's like 0.5% different. Yep. 1015 hours is a pretty standard amount, and it's just stunning really how you can predict that so accurately.
Yep.
And it now also you can get it in duller weather as well, obviously. So no, I agree. So on that happy note of trying to generate our own energy straight from sunlight or wind power, not just from fossil fuels, is where we want to be going with this whole project. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll finish now, but please do fill in on localplan.winchester.gov.uk. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.